Hey, what's happening, everybody? Welcome in a little Dirt and Sprague overtime here on the 1080 The Fan YouTube page. Thanks, everybody, for watching and subscribing. Oregon spring game is on Saturday. Sprague knows this. I'm a spring game football nut. I can't get enough of it. Psyched to see what Oregon looks like on Saturday. Joining us is our good friend Ryan Clarke of the Oregonian, at Ryan T. Clarke on Twitter. Go give him a follow. Ryan, first off, man, it's interesting with the Oregonian this week. Bill Orm's been in the news a lot, talking about spring games and attendance numbers. I'm just curious what your expectations or thoughts are about what Saturday is going to look like at Autzen, because I've been around the program a long time. I went to Oregon. When I was in school there, this was not a big deal. You'd show up maybe on a Saturday, have a couple of beers, have fun on it if the day is sunny, and then you go back to your partying or whatever else you're doing. This has turned into an event. How surprised are you at how big of a deal this has turned into for Oregon?
I'm not terribly surprised, but I think it is definitely something that's worth noting, right? The idea that there's going to be this massive crowd at the game. Now, they may not sell out Autzen Stadium, but they're sure going to have a lot of butts in the seats. And, it's the pageantry of it all, right? Like the Matt Kearney concert afterward, everybody can, take in a truly Oregon day in Eugene as part of this. But honestly, I think it's indicative of this moment for Oregon's football program in general, right? The idea that they're moving into the Big Ten, that there's all this hype around that move, but also around, the program that Dan Lanning has built, an opportunity to contend for a national championship next year. Like all of those factors are confluencing in a way that has created what I think is going to be a really fun day on Saturday for sure.
Yeah, Ryan, doesn't it kind of speak? It feels like, at least to me, watching this for basically my whole lifetime, like the spring game, as Dirt mentions, has grown in popularity. And it just kind of feels like Oregon, who's been right on with the branding, right on with how they've kind of grown what they are, understands the moment and understands the importance of caring about this. And look, it doesn't make every fan base good versus bad or great or awful, I think, depending on who shows up. But I think it just kind of speaks to what Oregon has been in general in the last 12 to 15 years of kind of understanding how they can benefit themselves by caring about something in a non-football season moment.
Yeah, like it's innovative thinking and it's massive investment right now. And this is part of the discussion with Bill's column, right? Talking about, his column's thesis was essentially that Oregon State should look to a program like Oregon's as an example for certain aspects of how to navigate this conference realignment stuff. Obviously, Beaver fans aren't a fan of that, but you look at Oregon, right? You look at the way that they've sort of set up this spring game. It is them sort of meeting that moment, right? And taking, like you said, a moment that's not within the confines of the fall football season, where the hype is usually at its peak, and capturing this excitement and getting people out to the game. It doesn't just happen naturally. It doesn't just happen because the team is good, right? This is institutional investment. This is creative thinking to have a concert on the field after the game. I can't imagine that's the first time that's happened for a spring game, but something like that even being part of the equation rather than it just being a glorified scrimmage with people sitting in the stands, that stuff matters. And that's how you grow the brand on a national scale. It's how you get recruits paying attention. Obviously, there's going to be a ton of recruits in town this weekend to take in that spring game. So getting an atmosphere that's close to normal Autzen or on the way to normal Autzen, obviously that's a huge selling point, and Dan Lanning is still succeeding in selling a lot of those recruits on that.
Well, and then you look at the team, Ryan, of following them for as many years as I have. There's a lot of years where they're good and they're fun to watch, but at the end of the day, there's kind of a ceiling on what they can accomplish. And part of that is losing those opening games, Auburn or Georgia, obviously a couple years ago. It's like, doesn't mean you can't have a good season, doesn't mean you can't have a fun season, but we know that they're not quite the cream of the crop in the sport. Last year was the first time watching them. I know they couldn't get through Washington, but it felt like this team legitimately could win a national championship or at least compete with anybody in the country. And it's crazy to say, thinking of what they lost, that they're even better this upcoming year because of what they've done in the portal and what they've done in recruiting. You've been down there now this spring, kind of covering them and getting to know them. What has stood out to you? And is there that belief for you as somebody covering them that this is one of the best teams truly in all college football?
Yeah, honestly, that was one of the biggest things that stood out to me, just being around this group day to day. Now, obviously, the team and the program and Dan himself, they're going to sell their program. They're going to say it might not use the word best, but they're going to say, we do this well. This is our culture. This is, what we've built, yada, yada. But you look around and you see who's coming back. You see who's come in, and you see what they're doing on the recruiting trail, both last year and into this year. And you start thinking, wow, like with the new college football playoff being what it is, where you don't have to walk on that tightrope anymore, where you lose one really big game against a really good opponent and suddenly you're out of the picture entirely. Last year's Oregon team is a good example of why this new format with the playoff gives teams like them a shot. And I think you're right. I think this is a better Oregon team than last year. The puzzle pieces still have to fit together. The depth chart has to be organized. There's a long way between now and August, but I mean, the sky is truly the limit with this group, and the new format being as it is allows them more freedom to work out some of those kinks at different points in the season in ways that, last few years, you simply couldn't do that. And there have been multiple times, not just in the last 10 years for Oregon, where they've lost out on the playoff because of the limited format. But in Dan Lanning's tenure, you could argue every year they've been on that precipice and have been a moment or two away from being in that conversation. So that this could be his best team, in addition to being the clearest path for them.
Yeah.
I thought Dylan Gabriel was obviously a huge addition for them. Obviously, they got Dante Moore coming in and kind of recommitting with Oregon, and he's going to be a backup. But Dylan Gabriel, pretty massive name to get coming from Oklahoma, given what his career in college has been. Is it kind of weird to think that like your quarterback play drops just because Bo was just so special and unique, and yet your team is better based on what we've seen in the portal and some of the guys that are coming back from last year's group?
Yeah, obviously the production is going to be different with Gabriel versus Nix, right? The idea of this hyper efficient, perfect fit for Will Stein's offense and Bo Nix leaving for the NFL. And then you bring in a guy in Dylan Gabriel who is just as experienced as Nix was when he came into Oregon, or at least what he was last year for them. But it's not going to be, I think, a matter of like the production drops and others have to step up, as much as he's a different beast than Nix was, right? He's a guy that can move in and out of the pocket, can run with the ball in ways that Nix didn't do terribly often. And he's somebody that could fit almost as well into Will Stein's offense, and Will Stein can build that offense around him in a lot of ways as well. But he's obviously a plug and play guy. 5 years of experience in college football, a ton of talent at the receiver spot. That's the other thing that's going to make things infinitely easier for him, is that there are 3 or 4 guys that are elite level receivers in this conference on this Oregon team with a lot of experience in their own right at different programs. So I definitely understand why Dylan came to Oregon, right? This is like the perfect situation to come into as like a experienced transfer quarterback, because basically all of the pieces around him, with the exception of maybe some different questions of who will start and who will be the most productive along the offensive line, this is the type of place you want to be for sure.
Let's go through some of those new names outside of Gabriel and Moore, because they're going to get all the attention at quarterback, and they're going to be highlighted. And I'm with you on everything that the reasons he chose Oregon. All of them make sense because how much talent is there. Jabbar Muhammad was one. I know you got a piece up on him. Talk about rival fan base is not happy, not thrilled with the comments he made about dreaming of going to Oregon. Evan Stewart is another guy whose name you hear a whole bunch. Cam Alexander, Kobe Savage, or so, new defensive linemen. Who are some of the guys that have, now met with the media scrum? Who are some of the names that you're hearing that are turning heads? Because this is a unique thing about college football now. You got to kind of learn half of a new roster now. And Oregon's brought a lot of guys in this year. Who are some of those names that are standing out or that you've talked to that you've enjoyed your conversations with?
Yeah, I mean, the first one obviously that comes to mind for me is Jabbar, because I spoke to him a couple of days ago, and he's just a really like bright and intelligent and super thoughtful guy. But he's also he's a defensive back, so he's a killer, right? He's got the dog mentality through and through, in ways that you only really see at that position, right? You know, it's funny that players that play different positions on a football field, they're all athletes, they've all been playing the sport their whole life, but the different positions can take on sort of different identities. And this guy, Jabbar Muhammad, fits the cornerback mold to a T, basically. You know, he's a Dallas kid, grew up in the suburbs of Dallas. He mentioned that he had like 60 first cousins growing up, and they were all basically playing peewee football at the same time, which is crazy. And so you think about a guy like that, like, of course he's going to want to stand out and have an edge and have a chip on his shoulder, right? Because he came from a situation in his life and in his family where, like, his dad played college football, his brothers play college football. He's competing with 5 dozen cousins at once, basically. So he's a really compelling personality, and the stuff with, you know, the Washington and Oregon rivalry and the layers of that to his transfer. Anytime anybody brought it up, he had the sort of classic deflection move. Like, people, including myself, asked about like motivation for the Michigan game, motivation for the Washington game, obviously. And he's locked into this situation. But at the same time, he's also watching like Narcos and The Godfather on Netflix. And like, if I know defensive backs well enough, they take little pieces of motivation and like study things in sort of creative ways to have the dog mentality. And I feel like he's probably doing that there. I don't think he just picked up The Godfather and decided, oh, you know, this will be a fun movie to watch. But, you know, Jabbar is not the only one. He's the first one that comes to mind for me. Obviously, Evan Stewart is lining up across from him throughout the spring. The wide receiver who transferred in from Texas A&M. Tremendous pass catcher, really athletic, somebody that can be their number one wideout in a room full of potential number one wideouts, right? Guys like Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant Jr. coming back in from last year. Different guys with experience at that position that you like to have in the group. Tez Johnson, obviously, a name that you can't forget in that group either. That level of experience at those positions has people has a lot of excitement among Oregon fans, among people around the program. You know, Kobe Savage, another one as a defensive back to bring in somebody with a ton of experience. I feel like I'm a broken record in the word experience with these guys, because you think about all of these key positions on both sides of the ball. The transfer portal allows for a lot more of that. And different kinds of experience are more or less important to being successful in the Big Ten, but having it matters, and having a group of guys that are bought into a vision and a system on both sides of the ball is something that can allow them to have a lot of success.
Yeah, I love anytime I think you get portal guys, people kind of wonder, you know, when you're jumping from team to team in what is college football now, it's like, how quickly can you gel? And I love that you highlight in the piece, like Trayshawn Holding standing behind Jabbar and doing the square thing. And indicating with the thumbs down. And I think it probably speaks to the chemistry they've already established, even though they're competing against each other day in and day out. I think a lot of people in our business would probably label this a trap question, and I don't mean it to be. I'm just genuinely kind of curious to pick your brain on it. Being new to like the Oregon Big Ten beat, what's kind of your 30,000-foot view of year 3 for Dan Lanning? He's without a doubt a name that everybody in America talks about. It's always a debate. Is he a top 10 guy? And it's like, you can either rank that by what you've accomplished, which for him in 2 years he's won, but he hasn't quite won, if you know what I mean. But also, if you're looking forward, I don't know if you could name 10 coaches you'd want over Dan Lanning. So it's a debatable thing. And Oregon always has these expectations. Stacked team, experience, as you mentioned, at so many positions. What, to Ryan Clarke, do you think Dan Lanning's year 3 is? What is an expectation, or what is kind of the feeling of what Dan Lanning and the Ducks should be, I think, in the 3rd year at the helm?
Yeah, well, you think about expectations in sports, right? Everybody lives in the moment, the what have you done for me lately, the immediate, the rings culture that exists across so many different sports, but obviously college football is one of them that it's pervasive, right? And Oregon constantly trying to shake off the flash over substance thing, including Dan Lanning even sort of making that a cultural identifier of this program last year, talking about playing not for clicks, right? This is the year in the short term to prove that what's being established here is legitimate and isn't just another sort of flash in the pan. Yeah, Oregon's in the mix, but they don't win the big game, but they come up short here. The scale on which you measure that success is different because of the new format. Obviously, it's easier for them to get into the playoff. I would expect they will be there regardless of whether they win the Big Ten conference. But if you're in that Big Ten championship game right away, there's a bar that you've cleared that, like, okay, Oregon is in this bigger super conference and they've arrived. That's one of the bars. Then you get into the playoff. Then it's like, okay, they're back in the playoff. How many games can they win? How deep can they go? Obviously, their goal is a national championship. Obviously, that's the standard that they want to hold themselves to. But I don't think that you look at this year as like a national championship or bust type of season for Dan Lanning. I think that there's a strong possibility that could happen. I think that the Ducks probably have a better chance this year than they've had in many years before of winning that national title, save for, obviously, for those 2 years that they made it to the game itself. But what you're establishing now and into the long term, I think, is more clearly defined when you look at what happens this year and you evaluate the state of the program, how it's navigating the world of NIL, of transfer portal, of all of these insane, constantly moving factors with the sport and with college sports in general. And you look at what the next 5 years are going to look like. And if this year is an example of that in the positive, then you feel good about it because Dan Lanning has reiterated over and over again his long-term commitment to the program. And at this point, like, if he's not leaving for that Alabama job, he's going to be here for a long time. And people need to really wrap their heads around that. Now, that's obviously not a guarantee. That's not a Dan Lanning told me he's never leaving or that he signed a lifetime contract or whatever. But there's two things you have to think about. One, winning a national championship is not everything. And two, the base that you, or the foundation that you create in order to continually and consistently compete for national championships allows you to throw more darts at the board, right? Because one team at the end of the year is going to have a national title. And for the last decade, it's been one of basically 3 or 4 schools. If you get into that mix and you're one of those programs, you're not just talking about establishing something that gets you a national title in the next 2 or 3 years when Oregon has this experience and Dan Lanning's at his sort of peak as a recruiter and as a tactician and everything else with his staff in place. You're talking about establishing something that lasts for multiple decades. And I think that is the type of vision that Dan Lanning has orated in that, not just this spring, but over the last couple of years. And this year is an opportunity to evaluate as clearly as we've been able to in Lanning's tenure, whether that is indeed being established.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think the numbers are out there. There's only 2 coaches that are active right now that have a national championship, I think, because Jimbo's gone. He's fired. Saban retired. Harbaugh just won and then left. And the only 2 that I can think of are Kirby and Dabo. I think everybody else is gone. So it's not an easy thing to do. And I'm with you. Like, it's one of those analogies of you just got to keep giving yourself a bite at the apple. Well, and eventually things will line up for you.
I think the one we keep forgetting, and
Mac Brown.
Yeah. Mac Brown. That's the only one that randomly will pop into my head.
20 years ago in Texas, he won a national title. But I mean, to this point though, Ryan, I'm glad that you're going on that because it's a really tough spot to be in as a program because there's the thought of national championship or bust. And it doesn't have to be that every year, because it's the idea, again, like Michigan. I use Michigan as an example. Michigan was a good program in its entire run under Jim Harbaugh. They didn't win a title until this year. I think he was there for 9-10 years. Took them a long time, but they had a bunch of shots. They finally got to the playoff, and you kind of slowly start tearing those bricks down. When you look at the landscape of college football, and I know this is tough because you don't cover every program, but the idea of, you kept using the word experience at certain spots that Oregon was able to bring in. And I've heard Lanning talk this spring about the depth being where he finally wants it to be in terms of having ones against ones and twos against twos. And you can have 3 different practices going on at the same time because their numbers are so strong. The way they're recruiting and then filling needs in the transfer portal, again, it's hard to answer because you don't know around every other program, but is there the sense of, like, is there anybody doing it better in the modern landscape of college athletics? Like, it feels like this system, if you could have asked Oregon to design a system that allows them to compete, this is the system that they would design, and they're maybe doing it better than anybody in the country right now.
Yeah, there's a good chance that they are, frankly, because not only of the institutional support of Phil Knight and Nike and the way that Oregon has built out its NIL and everything else, they're ahead of the curve for sure. They have an opportunity in these next couple of years to be ahead of those long-standing superpower programs like Alabama, like Michigan, like even Ohio State, and to be on par with them on the football field because of that, right? The idea of being able to bring in that amount of talent, but also retain it, right? To have ones going against ones, like you said, but also to have those guys be willing to stick around, knowing that their opportunity is there maybe next year. It's so easy in the era of the transfer portal for you to get to a certain point in your season or get to the end of a season, and suddenly, because a guy didn't get his chance or felt like he was slighted or didn't get a fair shake, that he's gone. Poof, right? But frankly, if you take care of the financial aspect for a lot of these dudes,
yeah,
they're good. They're set. If you're in a program, here's a good example, Dante Moore, right? He could have probably gone anywhere he wanted around the country to either get a chance to compete for the job or be a starter at a program in any one of the top level conferences at some mid-level school. But he came to Oregon knowing that, yes, he's going to compete. Yes, Dan Lanning has not named Dylan Gabriel the starting quarterback, but Dylan Gabriel's the starting quarterback. And so Dante, I think going to UCLA was him seeing the short term for him and for his career in the way that a lot of guys around college football do. And him coming back is him understanding the long term, and Oregon articulating that vision in ways that makes guys want to stick around, not just Dante Moore, but others, young guys who get recruited into the program and maybe they don't play for the first year or two all that much, but they stick around because they're bought into sort of a vision. And that's a cliche. That's something that coaches, harp on over and over, is culture and, building something that people want to be a part of. But if you genuinely do that, and you've backed up the Brinks truck to pay for it now with NIL, I mean, you're set. You have a program that can compete.
I know we got some spring questions for you coming up. I am curious, though, just your thoughts. One group that's catching my eye, and I imagine Duck fans are kind of curious about it. It's tough to replace leadership. It's tough to replace consistency. They're losing their starting center. I think it's an underrated kind of storyline. Not that people aren't thinking about it, just I think the amount of noise that's being echoed about Oregon, it's kind of getting lost in the shuffle there. Connerly's been there a couple years. How are the Hogs up front? How's the offensive line shaping out right now? What are we looking like with experience and something to kind of keep an eye out for during the spring game and moving forward to fall ball?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's veteran guys that, the word experience pops up yet again for, right? It's Marcus Harper, left guard, somebody that is a monster in there and is going to have a great year, I think, for them. Johnny Cornelius, right tackle, another one with a ton of experience that is pretty much a sort of a locked in type of starter. And they're the center position, Jackson Powers Johnson not being there obviously is a major blow. But that's also a guy in Jackson Powers Johnson who wasn't always a center, right? He's somebody that had that positional versatility, was a guard for a time. And there are names and people in the program that could move around into those different positions. Now, Dan has not been sharing that, obviously. Dan is not, one, at that stage yet, and two, gonna just be like, yeah, we're testing out so and so at this position and we're gonna see how it works, everybody. Like, that's not how any program like that operates. So you think about the names, obviously. Nishad Strother, 6-year redshirt senior, is one, who's sort of a backup guard on both the left and right side right now. He's somebody that could slot into Jackson Powers Johnson's role if he's comfortable at the center position. Younger players like Iapani Lalulu, that's somebody that, James Creppy and I have talked about as a potential starter at center this year. He's been limited in the spring. But the center position, I think, will get sorted out with somebody that either has that requisite experience and is sort of figuring out how to play center, or somebody that's younger, but maybe is able to step in and be like, hey, I'm the guy. I can play with these experienced players at that position. But Dan Lanning has proven over the last few years that even in sort of offensive line groups with mixed levels of experience, that they mesh and they recruit well enough from a talent standpoint that it tends to work out. There hasn't been a point over the last couple of years where I've felt that the O-lines under Lanning were shaky really in any way. And there's plenty of experience up front again this year.
Yeah, the pronunciation was solid there. I just stick with Poncho. That's a lot easier. Having him start in the Fiesta Bowl too was good for the experience for him, and we'll see if he ends up winning that job. Kind of on that note, Ryan, spring game this weekend. I'm excited for it just because largely what we're talking about, all these new names and faces. It's just fun to see them in a Duck uniform and what kind of roles are they having. If I give you 2 or 3 things that you're most either excited, curious, questioning going in, what are some of the things that there's only so much you can take from spring football, but if you're looking for some answers, what are those categories that you're looking for answers in?
Obviously the number one thing everybody's going to be excited about seeing is Dylan Gabriel, how he meshes into Will Stein's offense, what they show from the offense that is any sort of indication of what's to come. Can't imagine there's going to be a whole heck of a lot in the way of giving away their system here, but showing off that excitement, getting people excited about him and his chemistry with these receivers. That's the number one thing I think everybody's going to be watching. Secondarily, I think that, how the defense shakes out in terms of personnel, where they want to put somebody like Jabbar Muhammad to best utilize his leadership and skill set, who the sort of standout players on the defensive side are going to be next year. That's obviously not going to be defined within just the spring game, but big hits, interceptions, something exciting on the defense for people to put a pin in and keep an eye on for the fall would be a second piece. And honestly, I'm excited to see Atticus Sappington get out there in Autzen Stadium and get some kicks in. He's been hitting 50+ ones in spring apparently. So there's your kickers are people too portion of it. Beyond that, honestly, there's so little in the way of actual things to be gleaned from spring games, as we all know, that it's more of just like a little flash in the pan, exciting moment to get you to sate you, I guess, until the fall comes around. Yeah. So,
well, I was going to ask you about that, because it's funny that I know quarterback is the most important, but you could argue maybe the second biggest is the fact that they picked up a kicker and he was right down the road and might come in super clutch in a moment. The only thing you can't do with him is run 30 yards out on 4th down at the end of a first half. It's the only thing you can't do. It's the only thing we know he can't do.
Yeah, he liked being able to tuck it and run though. It's funny. I talked to him this spring too. He's a big weight room guy, and
He is, yeah.
so he there were some teammates coming by, big bulky offensive linemen, defensive linemen, and guys, and he just puts up the flex like to show off his bicep, and I'm like, this is funny because most of these kickers, they're sort of keep to themselves, do their own thing.
Yeah.
They're one of the guys, and to be sure, a lot of the kickers make good friends on the team, but it really seems like Atticus is broing down with these guys in ways that you may not have expected. So, and look, he was really good last year for Oregon State, and he could be somebody that is a really reliable kicker in a Big Ten conference that's going to have, even if Oregon is one of the better and more dominant teams, there's going to be moments where they're going to really need him. I can think of November in Ann Arbor. Maybe there's snow on the ground. You're going to need Atticus Sappington, and maybe that extra time in the weight room will help him. Who knows?
Yeah, playing Iowa, you're going to need a field goal kicker.
Right. You got to win 9-6. That's the way it works.
Exactly.
You don't need to remind Oregon of the importance of kickers throughout big games in their history as a program. So maybe this is finally the answer, and it took a Beaver to finally solve their woes in a big game in a kicking situation. I only got two more for you, Ryan. I don't know if Sprague has anything else. The only two that I'm curious of, we talk a lot about the portal. You see it all over the country. Week after the spring game, there's guys going, there's guys coming. I'm just curious, just from a general sense, how active you think Oregon will be in that space. And then, in this day and age of social media, we all become experts on different things, whether it be the pandemic or the stock market. Now, Oregon fans are experts on hit and run law. Any update? Do we know anything on Dalen Austin? Because that was a very serious but strange story at the same time that came out last week.
Yeah, we don't know anything additional on Dalen. Okay. Just starting there. At this point, my understanding is that he is still incarcerated, and that at this point, they're awaiting the next steps in that process. The only thing that we've heard from Dan Lanning to this point is that he knows his character, and he didn't go so far as to come out in defense of him or to say, people don't know everything here, but he did say that there are more facts that are going to come out with that case in the near future that may shed some more light on that situation as it continues to evolve. Obviously, it's an unfortunate thing that the program has to deal with, and he's a young player that they would hope can come out of this in a way, a young player and person that he'll be okay in the long run is obviously their hope around the program. The other piece, what was your other question?
Just the portal. I'm just curious. Like, do you see a lot of guys will leave? They'll kind of, because we talked about depth chart and where guys might fall. And, is there a fear there? Or are there guys that you think maybe will get pushed out because of scholarship numbers or any active positional needs for them? I don't really know what is officially out there. I'm just curious, just from a general sense, how active you think they'll be.
I think that they've filled out their roster pretty darn well to this point, to where I think that, yes, they will be active in a sense. They will be looking to bring in people to plug potential holes due to either injury or positional need or a desire for that depth, the 1-versus-1 thing that you alluded to. But at this point, the lion's share of their work is obviously done. And they have a roster right now that they feel like can contend for a national championship. There are sort of late arriving names in the portal that I'm sure they're keeping an eye on, but as far as specificity right now, no one specific comes to mind that's like close or a major target that they're circling on. But I would not be surprised if a couple more names come across that desk by the end of this spring. So
my last one for you, Ryan, we'll let you go on this one. Obviously, my co-host excited about the spring game. Shocking, the sweatshirt he's wearing. If you were to throw out the non-portal guys, the non-experienced players that are returning, is there a younger name that maybe isn't getting much buzz, or a player of interest for you, or just anything you've heard of a player or a name on either side? It doesn't matter to me, just that you think could be interesting to just watch to see what they do on Saturday at the spring game.
I think it's going to be fun to see Dante Moore out there. Obviously, we've seen a lot from him at UCLA. I think it's going to be fun to see what he can bring, because he's a guy that's going to get some opportunities in those sort of blowout non-conference or even conference games for Oregon. He's going to get some quarters this year. There's no doubt, if the scores go the way that folks think that they will. It's going to be fun to see how he's developing, and folks are bullish on him this spring. So obviously the other quarterback is somebody to look at. He's a transfer guy though. In terms of younger guys, Jaden Lamar, running back, sophomore, he's going to be in the mix this year in a really talented running back room. Of course, there are guys in front of him like Jordan James, Noah Whittington, but Jaden's in there, and that's a position where I think maybe they could target one or two more names in the portal, because depth at that position is obviously a major addition. But I think that he in Jaden Lamar is somebody that folks can keep an eye on for that spring game, because those guys are always going to get reps, right? It's running clock to a point. There's rules that befit them running the ball as much as they like to do anyway. And so guys like Lamar will have more opportunities, and maybe he'll break one off.
He looked really good as a true freshman last year, getting some limited time and blowout wins. I'm excited to see the jump he makes. There you go, Ryan Clarke. Whole crew from the Oregonian going to be down there on Saturday. Everybody caravanning down. Yes,
sir. We'll probably be in separate cars, but we'll be heading down there for sure.
Well, fingers crossed for some dry weather. Go give him a follow on Twitter at Ryan T. Clarke, covering Oregon for the Oregonian. Thanks for jumping on the little overtime here on YouTube, man. We love having you on the show. Thanks for the bonus time today, and have fun covering the game on Saturday.
Absolutely, y'all. Thanks.